Sound check. C Farsight is back. He's been away for a while. Last week, we even was hoping nothing bad happened to C Farsight, but he's back. First one in the chat, as always, and that is good. Giving us a sound check. Thank you very much, and welcome back, C Farsight. Sean Stryker, welcome. Pardus Prime Bikes is correct. We will be talking about bikes tonight, so thanks for joining, everybody. Carnier, welcome. It is January 26th, and this is Custodes Tactica episode 49, I believe. 49, yes. So 50th episode next week. And we are getting close to the end of the unit deep dive series. Who else do we have to do? We still have to do Venatari, very big one there. And we have to do the big Lords of Flyers, which we can do in one episode. So I think we're like a couple of episodes away. And yeah, we don't have that many units. So once we get done with the deep dive series, we're going to start on a series called Matchups. And maybe I'll come up with a better name. But anyway, it'll be starting to talk about matchups, and we'll talk about factions specifically and things to look out for, maybe how best to play against them. And yeah, we'll start a series of that. After the deep dives, we're going to be starting some of the tabletop strategy sessions that we've been trying to work out how to do, and we tested last week and it works. So we're going to start to do those as well. But you know, there's only so many nights a week I can stream, so we got to start wrapping stuff up before we can start new stuff. So like, it'd be really cool if I could do it every night, but I can't. So and these are things just while we can't play games, that's the best we can do. Pardus Prime, if you want to ask a question about rules, you can go ahead. I can't give you a promise that we're going to answer it correctly, but try your best. If you want to ask rules questions, of course, you could join the Discord, and we have a rules channel there you can ask, of course. And anybody else interested in what we talk about in the Discord, which is mostly Custodes stuff, but there's other channels as well, feel free to join the Discord. That link probably doesn't work anymore, but somebody can post an up-to-date link in the chat. It's annoying how the link keeps changing. It's like annoying. Okay, so before we get started, welcome everybody. Hope you're staying safe in this lockdown period. In some parts of the world, apparently, they're having 100-person tournaments, and COVID is not a concern for those people, apparently, so good for them. But for us, it's still locked down in your house, so nothing going there. So strangely enough, the Cenobium... Dark Angel Cenobium Forge World guys came back into stock. Those are the dudes with the swords, the Terminator guys with the swords and the shields, or just swords and guns. And they came back into stock, and I've been looking at them as a alternative to Deathwing. So I have a huge Dark Angels army. In fact, it was the first army I played seriously in Warhammer. And I have not touched them since Custodes came out, and I played them all through 7th, Lions Blade Strike Force. I mean, people who know me know I played Dark Angels hardcore for a long time, and I have a lot of Dark Angels, not least of which is Mastodon and Thunderhawk, all in Dark Angels, all that stuff. I never owned a single Deathwing model, partly because until recently, Terminators were shit. So I never owned any Deathwing. And stopped playing Dark Angels once Custodes came out. Haven't played a game with Dark Angels, I think maybe one or two since. And then you want to see them sometimes. Well, my Dark Angels army is way over there. It's mostly in boxes, so you won't see that anytime soon. It's mostly Little Marines. I have a bunch of Primaris stuff that I haven't painted or even put together, and you know, like this dude. And so, and then I have the big stuff, like, you know, you can see the... You know, that's the Thunderhawk right there and the Mastodon beside Nagash. So, you know, there you go. And that's all painted green. Anyway, so huge Dark Angels, and then stopped. So now I decided to bring it back. A, because I got no hobbying to do. And B, because I found those Forge World alternatives to Deathwing models, because I hate the Deathwing models. Those old Terminators are really ugly ass. And I also hate the bone color. So anyway, so... but now I have found the alternative to the Deathwing models, the Forge World Cenobium Knight dudes for Deathwing Knights, because they're Terminators, and the Dark Angels, like champions or whatever, the normal power armor guys who have the sword and shield, and they're going to be my blade guard vets. Like the normal blade guard vets are fine, but they're a bit, I want Dark Angel's flavor for Inner Circle, so that's what I'm gonna use. So I'm using those Forge-World guys. They're on their way over now as Deathwing, and then I can break out some of my old Ravenwing stuff. And I had the opportunity to paint some of the new Marines. I don't think I've painted a single new Marine since Primaris came out. Well, no, I have. Long time ago in 8th, but not since 9th. So I'm working on a Dark Angels army, courtesy of Jeremy. Thank you for the list idea. So I got Assault Intercessors going. These guys are super cool, very easy to put together. I've got, of course, some Eradicators. And because I had an Indominus box set that I never even opened, and everything's still new on sprue, so I just put those things together. I traded my Harlequin stuff to Francois for some more stuff and some 3D printing. Show you that in a second. And the old Azrael model sucks ass, and I'm very disappointed it never got updated. A long time ago, I made my own, which is a combination of kind of Dark Angel sprues with a librarian. So this is my Primaris Azrael with the sword and his plasma thing. And I put him on the 32, so he's like the old Azrael in terms of game size. And he's about the same size if you include that banner that sticks up on the old Azrael's head. So there we go. And this is not for tournament competition. This is for the channel, so I don't really care if it's not exactly the same. Then I get to resurrect my old Interrogator on bike conversion that Nick did for me so many years ago. This is that cool Interrogator chaplain with the Power Fist model that he put onto a Ravenwind command bike, and with the Mace of Redemption, and I just put it on this oval base now with the times. He's going to be my Primaris chaplain. All right, because I love that model, one of my favorite models, and I'm going to use it, damn it. And then I've got my Ravenwing Apothecary on a bike from old school Ravenwing days, and on the new base. I've got some old attack bikes, which are horrible, crappy models, but, that's what they are, and they're decent, so, we'll do those. And, of course, I had Inceptors from before, and so I have my Plasma Inceptors, a unit of 5 guys on their kind of ruined bases there, because I hate those flying bases. And that's my army right now. I'm going to have 5 Blade Guard vets, who are those Dark Angels champions dudes. And I'm going to have Deathwing Knights, who are those Cenobium dudes. It's going to be pretty gross. And so courtesy of Francois, because those Forge-World guys don't come with enough shields, and they also don't come with maces. So we've got some nice 3D printed Dark Angels champions shields, which are very cool. They look very much similar to the Forge-World ones. And we've got some maces for the knights. Of course, I am buying a box of Deathwing Terminators because I do want a few of those weapon sprues and the banner for my champion. But yeah, so that is my current project. Okay, going back to Custodes. So currently what I've done is, because I wanted 2 Achilles dreadnoughts, but I didn't want to buy another one because stupid cost. So I took my Gladys and I magnetized it, of course, and so now it is a Achilles. There we go. So straightforward, and this is just a spear 3D print that I found and bought for a couple of bucks online, and Francois printed that for me, and it's pretty cool. So yeah, I know about the perma Discord link, and I make it permanent, and for some reason, and it's not permanent. So I don't know what the problem is. All right, so now, so that's current hobbies. People can look forward to seeing maybe some Dark Angels on the channel at some point. Okay, so tonight, deep dive, bikes. Okay, so bikes. More specifically, Virtus Praetors, but tonight we will be talking about the Dick bikes as well, the Agamatus Custodians. But basically, Virtus Praetors have had a long, storied, turbulent history in our faction. Sorry, I'm just going to move that down a little bit more. And when our faction first came out, of course, the biker was by far the most popular and powerful unit that we had in our codex. Terminators were really not great. They were overpriced. They really had not a lot of things going for them, and the biker was fast, tougher, more powerful, more expensive too. And we didn't really have any other units. It was like Terminators, Guardians, or Bikers. And so the biker became the thing for our codex. It was Codex Biker at the time was the joke. And of course there was no forge rules yet at the time, so that was it. And so the meta kind of turned, meta at the time was also like a lot of guard, that was a lot of like nids and orcs, and so there was a lot of horde at that time, and it was, of course, it was a different game. And so hurricane bolters were pretty good back then. Nobody had all these doctrines and stuff making bolters better, so you didn't feel like you were shooting old school crappy bolters. So bike spam was the thing back then. We had Loyal 32 with 17, 18 bikes. You had Rusty 17. I played 17 bikes, 2 captains, and Loyal 32 for many, many months, maybe even a year or more. I remember playing it at Basement Open. I played it at Can Hammer Team. I played it all the time. It was the thing. Lots of bikes and like Loyal 32. Stooping Dive was still a big gotcha moment and a powerful moment for 6 to 9 months after the Codex came out. Not many people were playing, and it always got people. And unfortunately, then things changed. Knights came along. That was basically sounding the death knell for the biker list because bikes really struggled with Knights and were easily killed by Knights. Guardians were getting cheaper. Marines then came along. The rise of the Storm Shield just to stay alive. Horrible meta for bikers. And then eventually, when our book came out recently, cheaper Terminators, better rules, and a new way of playing, and then a new edition and a new game. So really, bikes started off at the top, but maybe just by necessity, and then took a dive, and you didn't see a lot of bikes. I did go through that period of time in sort of late 8th when I was playing like the tanks at the back, a unit of Terminators, a unit of bikes, and I had decent success with that. But they always felt like they were too expensive and didn't put out enough. And so all the while, though, all this time, the bikes never really changed very much. At first they were 80 points, and you paid 10 points for the Hurricane Bolter, so basically 90 points. And then it went up to 95, but the salvo came down and was then free. And then we got the benefit of not having penalties to shoot heavy weapons, because even before that, the salvo was not good because you get -1 to hit. And then we didn't have the D6 reroll Archotech stratagem back then, so it was like D6 damage. It was really crappy. And so it still didn't make it that viable. And so bikes stayed like that, and you got the impression that GW never wanted to really buff them because they didn't want to see Codex Biker again. And maybe that's true. Who knows? But it wasn't enough to bring bikes. And then at some point in there, you had the introduction of the Forge World rules. And in the Forge World rules were the Agamatis Custodians, who from this point onward in this show, I will now call Dick Bikes. And they didn't make a splash. First of all, because they were $60 each bike. They were annoying sized bases, and they were super points expensive. We're talking 120 points for like a last pulsar. I think it was more. It was like 130 or something. And so they had already been priced out of usefulness by points, and even though they had some pretty compelling weapons. So there was no meta at the time which really called for that kind of expenditure. So the Dick Bikes never really made an impact at the time when they came out. But then for a very short period of time, they got points drop, and our bike stayed the same, and so it became the biker body, either the Virtus Praetor or the Dick Bike, and then your choice of 5 weapons. And although the Dick Bike weapons were still more expensive, they were cheaper within realm of usability. And there was starting to be the Marine meta, 2 wounds, 3 wounds. People were starting to experiment a little bit with them. And then that time is gone now again, because now our bikes have come down, and so that gap has reappeared, and now it seems like the Dick Bikes are too expensive. Anyway, so we're going to be talking about bikes tonight, Dick Bikes and normal bikes, and let's get on with it. Okay, so as always, first we talk about the models. So, the Virtus Praetor models are just normal GW plastic models, very nice kits, bit of a pain in the ass to put together, but not too bad. Annoying to paint, but again, not too bad. Always magnetize the lance arms. You will regret if you do not do that. Magnetize the lance arms, first of all, so that it's easier to transport, and second of all, then you don't have to worry about those silly angles that they go at. And then the base, people argue about the base all the time. Magnets, no magnets, whatever, it doesn't matter. These are just Dragon Forge bases, never mind that. But this is the original stem. All you do, you just drill a hole in the bottom where the hole is, drill through the little support, stick your base in there, boom. And then all you have to do is just take them out for transport, boom. If you're playing on crazy terrain where the whole bike won't balance, just use the base. It works out beautiful that way. Okay, so there's Virtus Praetors, and of course you build your captains with these guys as well. There you go. Okay. And, standard bikers, and, the oval base, so these come with oval base and those stupid speeder round bases. Use the oval bases. First of all, it's much easier to hide them in battle, and you can choose between having them take up more space or less space depending on how you orientate them. So, very good bases. Okay, now let's talk about the dick bikes. So the dick bikes, or the Agamatis, are these guys. And first of all, these guys are at least 1.5 inches longer than the Virtus Praetors, okay? They're not that much taller, but they're longer, and that makes them harder to hide. The other reason it makes them harder to hide are these stupid speeder bases, and that's the only base they come with, so this is the base you're supposed to use. And they're flimsy, and they just stick in a tiny little hole at the bottom, and these things like twirl around, and it's a pain in the ass. You don't balance on anything. It's really stupid. Actually, I did play them with the Virtus Praetors bases, and they play much better, but unfortunately we have to use these. And then again, like with the other bikes, you should magnetize the arms for transport, but these spears all sit flat like that anyway. That's how it's designed, so it's not as big a deal. And then the other thing to say is, so magnetize the weapons. You don't have to magnetize the weapons. These actually, once they're painted, there's enough friction to just keep them in because they just sit flat like that, the 3 weapon types. So you don't actually have to magnetize or glue them. You can just stick them in and then just change them out. But if you want to magnetize, probably put one in the bottom of the well or put one at the base of the weapon there, and then they just slot in and out. But do that because you might be changing those weapons if you're going to use them. So, and these mofos are $60 a pop, which is ridiculous, but that's what it is. So, yeah, I don't think you need to go out and buy these if you don't have them already. Okay. Otherwise, they're nice Forge World kits. Okay, so let's go on. So, role and keywords. Okay, first of all, the bikers are fast attack. So this was basically a role that was uncontested for a very long time. And even after Venetari and Palace came out, the Palace might contest it a little bit back at the time, but not a lot. And Venetari definitely didn't contest it because Venetari were shit back then. But now, with Palace tanks getting a lot of attention, points drops, shooting that we need, and Venetari being very good, cheap, mobile, and giving us good shooting, and now that we can have, there's some real competition for the fast attack slot. And so now you're finding that competition for patrols and for battalions. With the cheap availability of patrols and battalions now, it's getting a little bit easier to fill those slots. But you are seeing armies out there now with Outrider detachments to allow you to bring a combination of bikes, Venetari, and Palace tanks. So the fast attack slot is heating up in the same way that Elites was very overloaded. And so that's the thing. Second keyword is core. So the dick bikes have core, and one will assume that when our book comes out, the normal bikes will also get core, even though they don't have it right now, but doesn't matter because none of our rules have that anyway. So presume they will be core, and it's going to be fine. And obviously it's better to be core than not to be core. There's no real doubt about that. Okay, next keyword is fly. So fly is still one of the best keywords in the game. Fly plus infantry equals win. And so fly is one of the best keywords. It still has most of its benefits and not a lot of downside. They've tried to nerf fly a number of times over the years. The biggest nerf was probably the nerf to be able to fly over terrain in the charge phase. Now it's just models, and so that's a bit of a bummer. It means you have to charge around buildings, and since you're not infantry, you can't go through buildings. So that is a bit of the biggest nerf to fly really was that. And then the second fly, of course, with ninth is that when you fall back, you can't shoot. So fly has lost a couple of its big benefits, but it is still an extremely powerful keyword that lets you move most of the time with freedom and impunity. And when you go fast as well, it's really good. So fly keyword, good to have. There are not a lot of things out there that punish you for having fly. There are some weapons that give extra to hit if you have fly. And while those are out there, they're not very common. And most of the time, it's not a big deal. Especially without riptides all over the place these days. All right. The next keyword is biker. So biker, unfortunately, is not a great keyword. There's not a lot of benefit to being biker. You miss out a lot on the infantry. You miss out a lot on infantry keyword when you're a biker. And I remember in the old days, I was playing Ravenwing, an entire army of Ravenwing bikers. First game of 8, I think, or close to it. And I was playing Logan, and we were playing the Relic. And no one in my army could pick up the Relic because I was biker keyword. It was so annoying. All I had to do was surround it and try and survive to win the game because I couldn't pick up the Relic. So annoying. So, you don't get all the terrain benefits and stuff, and you can't move through ruins and stuff like that. So biker is not really that great. There are a few strats that are just for bikers. Often you miss out on like chapter tactic type rules and stuff unless you're Marines. It's like, biker is not a great keyword to have in general, I gotta say. But they have it, so there it is. Okay, the next keyword is, of course, Virtus Praetor or Agamatus in terms of the dick bikes. This keyword really doesn't mean that much right now because there's nothing specifically for those people, for those keywords. But hopefully they will continue their trend in integrating Forge World into our codex so that when our new book comes out, things will be more generic like bike instead of, Virtus Praetor, or and be Terminator instead of like Alaris or whatever. So hopefully whatever the Virtus Praetors get, the dick bikes can also get in our future book. Okay, those are the main roles and keywords. A final thing about unit size. So the original bikes can go up to 10 man. That is now 850 points. It's a lot of points, but you can go up to 10 man. In the old bike spam days, I used to run 7, 7, and 4, or 7, 7, and 5, something like that. 7, 7, and 3. These days, I don't think you're going to be running a 10-man squad of bikes. I mean, you could certainly try it, but that's a lot of eggs in one basket, and I think the validity now of running smaller units like 3 or 4-man is certainly much higher now, with Killmore going basically out the window and having more objectives to play and needing more units on the board. And so I think those big units are kind of going down a little bit. You also penalty like against blast and coherency, and there's a lot of reasons not to run big units like that anymore. I think the standard size unit is probably about 5. That's kind of the standard bike hammer size unit, but I think 3 to 5 is a good number these days. And then you also want to try and hide. And so once you get above 4 or 5 models, it becomes pretty hard to hide the unit. So dick bikes can go up to 6 only, but just the same reason you wouldn't really go over 5 on the normal bikers, you definitely wouldn't want to do that on the dick bikes. And definitely once you get over like 3 guys, maybe 4 guys on the dick bikes, because of the bases, they become really hard to hide. And that's a problem. So definitely you wouldn't end up with 6 dick bikes. Now, unfortunately, they come in packs of 3 or single bikes, of course, but so if you buy 2 packs, you get 6, so that's annoying. And when you buy Virtus Praetors, you get 3. So in order to get 10, you'd have to buy 4. But then you have two biker caps. So, all works out. Okay, so that's just something quick about the unit size. We will be talking about how to take them, what unit sizes, later on in the play strategies. But that's just a mention about how far you can take it. 10 bikes, that's pretty far. Okay, stats. So statistic-wise, stat line, the 2 bikers are completely identical. So they both have movement 14 because they're bikes. Jet bikes, maybe they should go a little bit faster than normal bikes, like 16, right? Like, normal bikes go like 14, so maybe the jet bike should go faster. I don't know, 14. As bikes, they can auto advance 6, which is obviously nice. And that does make it the fastest unit in our book, other than the flyers. The Palace can move 16, but doesn't auto-advance 6. So when you really need to get somewhere 20 inches down the line, the bikers can do that for you. And together with smaller tables, the bikers cover a lot of territory. And, if you want to play them in solo watch too for that extra inch, that makes a big difference. So they're pretty fast. Weapon skill 2, ballistic skill 2 as standard for Custodes. So T6, the bikers are T6. They get that extra toughness over infantry because of being on the bike. That's pretty standard rule for all bikes in the game. And so T6 is a big breaking point in toughness in terms of things like Grim Responsibility from the Shadow Keepers. So T6 is the breaking point. T5 is already lackluster, and T6, 7, 8 are the breaking point toughnesses. And so at T6, so Melta's still wounding you on 3s. Can't do anything about that. But Strength 7 stuff is now wounding you on 4s, so that's 1 CP less than a transhuman. Then Arcane Genetic Alchemy. And then Strength 6, you can make you wound on 5s, which is amazing. And Strength 4, you can make you wound on 6s, which is really good. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that bikes hate that are low strength, Strength 4, 1 AP, which is really annoying, and like 1 damage, 2 damage. And so, this puts Strength 4 down to Strength 3, which is wounding on 6, which basically means they don't do anything to you. So that can be very useful to make Strength 4 going to Strength 3, in my experience. So T6 is a very nice toughness in terms of using Grim Responsibility and avoiding having to use Transhuman. So 4 wounds, which is 1 more than infantry and the same as Terminators. I think, and we'll talk about this later when we talk about points cost, but I think 4 wounds just not cutting it on these things these days for 85 points. I think these guys need to go to 5 or 6 wounds to really make them super good and to keep up with everything else happening in the game today. So we'll see what happens to them, but 4 wounds just not cutting it on these guys anymore. 4 attacks as standard for Custodian non-characters, so they have 4 attacks like all the Terminators. Again, they could do with more for their points, but and 2 up, 4 up invuln as standard for Custodes. Okay, so that's the stats. Nothing too crazy. The thing to point out, of course, is the T6. Otherwise, fairly standard. All right, shooting. Okay, so basically there's 5 guns you can get. The Hurricane Bolter and the Salvo Launcher for the normal bikers. And then on the Dick bikes, you can get Las Pulsars, Adrathic Devastators, and the Lastrum Bolt Cannons. Okay, so, and until recently, the bike bodies were the same price, and so it was literally just a comparison of weaponry. But now that the normal bikes have dropped, now you have that gap again. Okay, so the important thing to note is that, that's a wide variety of shooting. So all the way from like horde killing, like Hurricane Bolters, all the way to minimum number of like Las Pulsar Strength 8 shooting and 1-shot like Melta shooting. So there's a wide range of weaponry in there. Then you have that mid-range Strength 5, Strength 6, Adrathic shooting, low number of shots, high damage. So, it's a wide variety. And so the good thing about the bikes is that while all those weapons are pretty short range, the bikes are very fast. And with the loss of the -1 penalty for shooting heavy, that's why you can even start to look at the Dick bike weaponry. Without that rule, that weaponry all sucks. So nobody wants to be a scrub and hit on 3s. So with the mobility to being able to deliver their firepower wherever they need to go, all the weapons have their own viable targets. So Hurricane Bolters. Unfortunately, because we didn't get no bolter disciplines or doctrines or anything, the Hurricane Bolter for us has been left behind. It is Strength 4, 0 AP, 1 damage. Doesn't get any better than that. Or worse. And we don't see as much T3 Horde these days. Maybe we're going to start seeing that. There's a lot of sisters out there. There is, we might see demons and stuff coming back when they get their book. Guard when they get their book, we might start seeing that. There's a lot of NIDs hanging around these days with big blocks of gaunts and stuff. So we might start seeing Hurricane Bolter fodder coming back. But right now, the Hurricane Bolter just not cutting it. In the old days, 60 Hurricane Bolters, you'd be mowing down things left, right, and center. And even boys and stuff that are T4, much less helpful against T4, but still the volume of shots was there to get through those things. Right now, if you want to make it do anything, you're probably choose your targets very carefully. It's still great against sisters, or you're using things like Blood Game Veterans or stuff to get around the Strength 4, which doesn't feel like it's really great, but could be used. But right now, so a horde of girls, sisters, you could put a lot of them down because you don't care about their ignore AP and the 1 damage, and you're just on armor saves. So, but with everything going like 2 wounds and 3 wounds, like the Hurricane Bolter just really, really ineffective. But again, it's a meta choice. Depending on what kind of meta you play in, you might still choose to go with the Hurricanes. And because it does give you the volume that nothing else in our army gives you. All right. Salvo launchers. And we're going to talk later about mixed units. Okay, salvo launchers, basically Melta. So it has 2 profiles. Okay, so let's talk about the flak profile first. So this is the anti-flyer profile. So you get +1 to hit against fly, which is less useful these days with hit caps and hit modifier caps. As well, you don't get that -1 to hit anymore for moving from heavy. So there's kind of like less reason to have that. It's less useful. And the profile itself kind of sucks. So it's strength 7, only -1 AP, and is D3 damage, and it's only D3 shots. Ugh, that's the shit that really sucks. If it was flat 2 shots or flat 3 shots, like D3 shot, man. Whoever wrote our codex just had D3 stuck to the end of his fingers or something. I don't know. So anyway, so it's a pretty lackluster weapon. And really, if you roll a 1 on that shot, you probably wish you'd fired the salvo Melta profile anyway. So yeah, you probably will hardly ever use that profile unless you decide to shoot at, 10 guardsmen and then you get 3 shots. Okay, fine. So anyway, you're probably better off taking a Hurricane Bolter for what that's worth. But anyway, so the Melta profile is standard Melta, so strength 8, -4, D6 damage. And instead of getting Melta rule, we get reroll wounds against vehicles, which is fine, but it would be nice to get better damage as well. You're basically forced to use Archaeotech Munitions stratagem to make that damage more reliable, especially since it's just 1 shot each. So yeah. People never considered this in the past when you were -1 to hit from heavy and when you paid an extra 15, 20 points for the salvo. But now it's become much more the standard armament for bikes because of the change to heavy, because of Archaeotech Munitions, and because of the way the meta is going with lots of 3, 4 wound things to kill as well as vehicles. And even with 3 or 4 wound infantry, you still need to use Archaeotech to reliably not waste 2 Melta missiles on 1 dude. So it's like not great. So 24-inch range, of course, you don't have to be half range to get the benefit, so that's good, and these guys can deliver 24-inch range. So that's the Melta, the salvo launcher, which is basically like the standard armament now on the biker. Okay, let's go to Dick Bike weapons. So the Dick Bike now, of course, 95 points base. Comes with the free Lastrum, which is really now outclassed by a heavy bolter. It is strength 6, -2, but only 1 damage, really kind of sucks. 36-inch range, 3 shots each, which seems low for the price of these bikers. And so this gun is just kind of lackluster. It should be updated in terms of damage, but it hasn't been, and just a low number of shots. It just doesn't seem good for the point value. So the next gun is the Adrathic Devastator, which is an extra 5 points more. So that takes these guys up to 100 points each. And it only gives you 2 shots, which I guess is fairly standard for Adrathic. But still, that's a low number of shots. And so only 10 shots from a 5-man unit, from a 500-point unit, only 10 shots. That seems really bad. And 18-inch range is just on the border of acceptable because of the speed of the bikers, but it sometimes is hard to get an 18-inch range. And the difference, one saving grace of the Adrathic Devastators is that it is strength 6, and that is different from every other Adrathic gun that we have, which is strength 5. So for whatever reason, maybe it's a typo, I don't know, but this Adrathic is strength 6, which then wounds Gravis on 3s instead of 4s. And that is a big difference in my experience of using the Adrathic dig bikes. But is it worth that much more points? It probably isn't, when you can get Adrathic all over different places for less. So yeah, but it is strength 6, -3, obviously 3 flat damage, which is good. So in a meta where we always want to be doing multi-damage, 2, 3 damage ideally, you know, you could think about it, but we'll talk about that a bit more later. But the Adrathic is there. And the final weapon is a very interesting weapon, the Las Pulsar. So the interesting thing is when the Las Pulsar first came out, the dig bikes were like 90 points, 95 points, and then the Las Pulsar was like 20 points, 30 points on top of that, which was crazy. Now, just looking at the weapon itself, which is still a 15-point upgrade, so that takes the bikers up to 110 points. So each Las Pulsar gives you 4 shots each. So that's pretty good. Like, that is a good volume of shots, and it's flat 4 shots. So a unit of 5 guys is putting out 20 shots. It's actually a decent number of shots, although that is now 550 points. So maybe you could argue it's not a decent amount of shots for a quarter of your army. Dorian, I'm going to answer that question later, okay? So it is strength 8, which is good, and AP 2, which is okay, and D3 damage, which sucks ass. It's basically shooting Castellan axes at 24-inch range. That's exactly what it is. So it's a decent amount of damage, but the D3 is going to let you down. If it was flat 2, it would be very nice. If it was flat something, it would be very nice. So this would be so good if it was a bit of flat damage, but it isn't. And obviously, it's a great weapon profile still for shooting at the medium and heavy infantry these days, although it will take longer for you to get through 3 wounders. And also for doing vehicles, because it's strength 8, although D3 damage, and also wounding T4 on 2s, which is very nice. So, and the 4 shots is, as I say, it's nice, but maybe not for 550 points. Unfortunately, just that cost really takes it really hard to consider running these because they're so expensive. But so if you run like a 3-man, so a 3-man dick bike unit with Las Pulsars over 3 salvo bikers, that's like 75 points extra. That's like a lot. That's almost an extra bike. So it just doesn't seem good. But if you have the points, you could try running a 3-man unit and get your 12 shots of Las Pulsar, which would be pretty good, fast, decent amount of output for only 3 guys. They got good melee. It's something worth considering. But, it's a lot of points. It's a lot of points for like 3 guys. And then the other thing is it's going to cost you like $300 in money. Which is not something to scoff at in terms of how expensive our army normally is. Okay, so overall, probably with the meta right now that we're seeing, salvo bikes probably still the best weaponry to run on your bikes. Obviously, if your meta is different, then you can change your consideration. But the salvo bike is probably the best combination of a decent weapon profile that is basically this kind of the same as... and then a lower number of shots, but good range, points cost in terms of money, and sort of the current sort of heavy infantry, vehicle heavy meta. Okay. Melee. Okay, so both units have exactly the same melee. Okay, so we don't have to talk about them separately. They're both 4 attacks base, which I feel like is too low these days. Or they need, shock assault or shock, whatever it's called, shock discipline, shock something where they get an extra on the charge or whatever. Like, we need something to help with our attacks, which are low, for our points cost. Strength 6, AP 3, D3 damage. Standard Custodes damage. So it's a nice stat line, but D3 sucks. Anybody here who's played bikes trying to kill a knight will know how much D3 sucks. It really does suck, and yeah. And so we won't go on about that again. So they basically have standard kind of custodian spear output in combat. The only difference is they reroll wounds when they charge, which is amazing. So especially in the transhuman era, being able to reroll that 4-up is really nice. And especially nice if you're going against something T7 or above. You really need to reroll to do anything with these guys. So the problem is, though, you can't get stuck in combat and stuck there for multiple rounds because your melee output will drops drastically when you don't get to charge. And you definitely don't want to get charged either. You always want to do the charging so you get that reroll. So so that's something really to be careful for when you're playing with bikes. But otherwise, they've got the standard sort of custodian melee output, which is, super not great. Obviously, we have things like Slayer of Nightmares now that for 2 CP is a bit costly, but can help you out against T7, T8 if you have to. But the D3 still sucks. If Slayer of Nightmares for 2 CP would let us reroll the damage too, that would be pretty sweet. But it's 2 CP just for that doesn't seem like it's really good when armies get +1 to wound as an army-wide rule. Still, it's decent melee combined with the fact that they're so fast that, it just adds to their value, which, to be honest, they need because they're pretty expensive. Okay. All right. So the melee potential is great with the fact that also they can hop screens if somebody is not screened against bikes properly. And, people haven't seen Custodes bikes in a while, so they might have lost some of the edge on how to defend against them. And so hopping over screens is nice, hitting at characters or backlines. Remember, though, unfortunately, 9th put a little bit of a damper on that in that you have to declare all your targets and make it to all your targets. So that's a little bit of a riskier play now if it's a longer charge. But that is still something that they can do. Smaller table, more terrain, and means that I don't think you ever have to deep strike these guys anymore. I don't think you should ever deep strike the bikes. You just don't need to spend the CP and then more CP getting them in where they need to go. So with the speed and the terrain density that you should be playing with in the smaller tables, it's fine. Okay. So that's the melee. So I would consider it pretty standard melee, but with the reroll wounds on the charge and a faster delivery mechanism. Okay, so they have no other added rules or abilities, just the standard 6-inch auto advance for bikers. So nothing much to talk about here. Okay, let's talk points. Okay, so as we mentioned, biker points really have not changed very much until recently. We continue to pay out of our noses for armor and invuln save, and for what used to be good 4 attacks with their melee profile. We're still paying for that. There's probably no reason for our bikes still to be so expensive, and a 10-point hike is a long time. A 10-point drop is a long time coming, and so they've always been around 90 points, 80 for body, 10 for hurricane bolters. Then they went up to 95 points with all the weapons thrown in. So that's where the salvo started to become a thing because it was kind of free, and now we have a proper 10-point lowering, 85 points all in either weapon profile. So that is becoming acceptable, and it is now basically the same price as an Aquilon with an Adrathic, but still 10 points more than a standard loadout Aquilon Terminator, and 10 points more than a Alaris Terminator with an axe. So the problem is that this gives you a choice, a direct throw-up choice, 2 units that their same points cost, but they're not comparable units. You can't compare a unit of Terminators to a unit of bikes. It's very hard to compare these 2 units, right? And so it's not really a direct choice, but it gives the illusion of a direct choice because they're the same points. But, it's really hard to compare those kind of units. And then, of course, so there used to be a gap. There used to be kind of Guardians and Troops, then Terminators, and we spoke about this during the Terminator episode, and then bikes. And that gap was what would stop some people from using bikes at all, and some people to try and justify what the bikes did to justify that gap. But really, there's no real justification for the gap except for movement. But that could be a justification. So now that gap is closed. So the Virtus Paretus has closed the gaps to the Terminators, but the Dick bikes are still up in the bike era. There's still the gap there. So really, that gap is closed. The bikes cannot get cheaper unless the Terminators get cheaper. The bikes will never be cheaper than Terminators. It's not possible. But they can't move anymore until the Terminators get cheaper. And then the Terminators can't get cheaper. They can get a bit cheaper. Because it's quite a while before they start butting into the troops. So they could still get a bit cheaper, 5 points. And then now you have another gap with the bikes, but then the gaps can close that. So everything has to slide along. If the Terminators don't get cheaper, the bikes will never get cheaper. And I think GW is really afraid to make the bikes too cheap. So that's the kind of pricing issue with bikes right now. Yeah. The other thing about bikes, at 85 points, really, to be good, they still need a CP spent on them to give the salvo better damage reliability. So that's not only 85 points, but also a CP every time they shoot. It's just not cool. Like, if we got better bolters or something, okay, maybe, but it's like, so you still need to spend that CP as well. But, that closing in the gap is an interesting dynamic that really, I don't think people really thought of it that way. So there's troops, then there's Terminators, then there's bikes, and now these gaps are closing. So that's good for the army, for these gaps to close, so then things become a real choice. Okay, Dick bikes. Let's talk about Dick bikes. Well, the problem with Dick bikes, as we already mentioned, is now they've been gapped to the normal bike, so there's a gap there. And that gap is not insignificant. So, when they first came out, the bodies were 90 points and all the guns were on top. The last pulsar was 30 points. It was 120 points for a last pulsar. Nobody would pay freaking 120 points for a single bike model. And then everything came down with the bike going to match the Virtus Praetors at 95, and then you would pay a small premium for the last pulsar. And so last pulsar bikes were 110, which was still more expensive, but 15 points for last pulsar over and above a salvo. So 3 salvos was 95 points each. 3 last pulsars was 110 each. That's a total of 45-point difference in a Custodes army that's just Misericordias. It's not even an extra model. So you could justify trying 3 last pulsar bikes instead of 3 salvo bikes, because the points difference really didn't get you anything other than daggers. But now, the difference between 3 salvo and 3 last pulsars is 75 points, which is almost a whole bike. It's definitely a Terminator. So that is significant. That's the difference between an Alaris cap and a shield cap. I mean, that's a whole sisters unit. There's a lot of things. And so 75 points is a big gap to have between 2 exactly the same models, just have different weapons that are not even that different. The difference between a salvo and a last pulsar is not that different, just the number of shots. So it's definitely not a 25-point difference. So that's why you can't justify the Dick bikes right now. Just the comparison to normal bikes is too great. It was acceptable before, now it's too high. So will the Dick bikes drop down? I don't know. They had the chance. They just released the Forge World book, and they knew that the points changes were coming right after that. So I don't see how that could not have been coordinated. But anyway, speaking of point coordination, the Vexilla just went up to 10 points in the app for some reason with the last update. Obviously, that is wrong. But anyway, just to let you know, don't be too alarmed. Okay, overall, the bikes are overpriced. But they cannot move anymore unless Terminators move. So I could see them dropping another 5 points and the Agamatis coming right down in our book if Terminators also go down. But if Terminators don't go down, the bikes aren't going to go down. The bikes will never be cheaper than Terminators. I don't see that ever happening. So they're stuck where they are, and so you make that determination based on what you need. So there we go. Okay, comparables. So this section is always difficult. Comparables or comparables. There's always I can't talk about every single model in the game. There's so many models, and actually a lot of the jet bike, the bikes comparables are actually the same things we talked about with regard to the Palace tank in the tanks episode. So I'm not going to repeat all of that, but if you can compare jet bikes to all those little speeder things, and then you could do those comparisons if you want. And it's very hard to compare them to the other factions' bikes because they're all way cheaper and usually have no particular durability and no melee output. So comparing the jet bike, for example, to like Reaver jet bikes or those stupid Eldar bikes, like other bikes, even just the normal Primaris Outrider bikes, it's not this. You can't. It's just too different to compare. It's got 85-point guys who have like melee and 2 up, 4 up, comparing to like some Reaver jet bike who's like T4 and like is like 18 points. So you can't. There's not a fair comparison. You can't really compare. But in general, I mean, there aren't any other bikes really in the game that are like our jet bikes. So durable. I know people don't think they're durable, but they're way durable than other factions' bikes and have such good melee and decent shooting all in one package, but we pay for that. We pay 85 points for that. So it's hard to do those comparables. You end up comparing it to vehicles, which maybe is not a fair comparison. So one thing you can compare to, for example, is the Marine attack bike. Now, the attack bike is obviously not a jet bike. It does not fly. It doesn't move it moves pretty fast, and it has multi-melta. So it has, more shots and the melta rule, and it's 45 points for a jet bike. So 2 of them is 90 points. So there's a nice little comparison. They put out more shots. Whether the melta rule is better than reroll wounds against vehicles, I don't know. But you have to spend a CP to make the damage even half as good. So maybe it all evens out. And it doesn't fly. But you get 2 bikes, and that's 4 wounds, T5 instead of T6, 3 up save, no invuln. So again, we are paying probably too much for durability that is no longer as durable as it used to be. And so that's a nice comparison there. 2 attack bikes to a jet bike. So, Inceptors. Again, you're comparing fly infantry to a jet bike. These guys are 40 points each, so 2 guys putting out a bunch of plasma. Again, different weapon than what we have, but it's like, there's some things that fly around and shoot things, and they don't really have any combat unless you're White Scars. But so that's an interesting little comparison, but probably not worth spending too much time on that. A lot of the speeders, as I said, small flying vehicles and things really compare well to the Palace tank. And that takes us to maybe the most compelling comparison that we could do tonight, which is the biker versus the Palace tank. Okay, so here's a real comparison, and we're going to come to 3 bikers versus 2 Palace tanks in a second, but just biker versus Palace, we're talking, 10-point difference now. So we've got 1 biker versus 1 Palace tank. So a biker is 4 wounds, T6, 2 up, 4 up. The Palace is twice the number of wounds, 8 wounds, T6, 3 up, 5++. So not as hard to take the wounds off, but twice the number of wounds. The biker shoots 1 melta missile with a CP to be reliable. The Palace shoots 2 shots that are not as strong, but do flat 3 and at longer range. So probably end up doing the same amount of damage depending on what you roll on your D6 and your Archaeotech. The biker has obvious melee potential. The Palace has none. The Palace moves 16 inches. The biker only moves 14 inches but can auto advance 6. Biker keyword versus vehicle keyword and all of those implications. And of course, the biker is OBSEC versus the vehicle is not. Sorry, I forgot to mention that in the rules. Obviously, both bikes are OBSEC, which is a big deal. Whereas the Palace tank is not, and that sometimes comes back to bite you. So obviously, this is a bit of an unfair comparison. Like, you can't just take 1 biker compared to a whole unit Palace tank because you can't just get 1 biker. So that's a little bit of unfair, unrealistic comparison right off the bat. And but it kind of gives you an idea of what GW thinks 95 points is worth. And because most people generally feel like 95 points for a palace tank is pretty good value these days in our army. So 85 points for a biker maybe not as much good value, which is kind of the conclusion that we're coming to. So should bikers be 6 wounds? That closed that gap a little bit. Should it get the new Melta rule? What would make it more compelling than a palace tank? At the end of the day, your decision might just come down to slots and points. But, because the minimum spend for a biker squad is 255, whereas a palace tank is just 95 points. So these are all considerations. Let's do the other comparison then. 3 bikers at 255 points, which is the min unit you can buy, to 2 palace tanks, which is 190 points, right? Yeah. So, other than the fact that you have 65 points left over if you buy the 2 palace tanks, you now have 2 fast attack slots taken up versus 1 fast attack slot from 3 bikers. Okay. 3 bikers have 12 wounds at T6, 2 up, 4 up, versus 2 palace tanks that have 16 wounds at 3 up, 5 up. So again, pretty comparable, but they've closed the gap from half the number of wounds to 3/4 the number of wounds. So that making up that gap a little bit, and it's definitely harder to kill them at 2 up, 4 up. You get 3 Melta shots, plus again spending that 1 CP, versus 6 shots of Arachnus. Which one does more damage? I mean, it's hard to know. It depends what you're shooting at. You're shooting a vehicle, or you're shooting at heavy infantry, multiple models versus 1 model. It's a toss-up, probably pretty close. And then 12 melee attacks, obviously, versus no melee attacks. And then table coverage. So 1 unit has to move around versus 2 palace tanks that can go wherever they want. And then, of course, the 3 bikers are OBSEC, whereas the tanks are not OBSEC. So now we're maybe talking a truer comparison. And when you look at it then, it really does the same answer as usual. It depends. What do you want in your army? Do you want 2 speedy little tanks? Let's say for a minute that they put out similar firepower. Do you want 2 little speedy tanks just to go around grabbing things that aren't OBSEC but are very fast and can get you secondaries? Or do you want 3 dudes who have a similar shooting output, are OBSEC, but can also hit things in combat? These 2 things compare very well, and really it's what you want from that slot or slots in your army. Okay. By the way, I'm not drinking milk. Okay. Stratagems. Let's talk about stratagems. Grim Responsibility. So Grim Responsibility, as we already talked about, good on T6. Okay, we won't talk about that anymore. Golden Lights, obviously, of the Merades. If you're playing Dreadhost and you're running bikes and you decide to deep strike them, you're going to need the Merades or a Teleport Homer. So that's probably not the best way to play bikes. Eagle Strike, again, Solar Watch is pretty nice for bikes, so it gives you an extra 1-inch move, and then it gives you the ability to do your rapid fire if you're running Hurricane Bolters. If you're running Salvo, it does nothing for you. And the problem is, though, you also need that person who's got that extra move aura to keep up with you. So inevitably, you have to put that on like a shield captain, or you have to start a Lars captain off the field, and then it just kind of drops in. So, it doesn't end up working out too well. And obviously, your bikes can occasionally snipe a character out late in the game, and so you can maybe force them to spend an extra CP. I don't know. It all seems kind of gimmicky. Emperor's Hand, obviously nice, like with any of our units, to ignore modifiers if you're running that. Shield host. Obviously, from Golden Light, you don't need if you don't deep strike. But if you do deep strike, you're going to spend a CP to deep strike these guys, which I don't think is really that useful. Unflinching. So back in the day, Overwatch, 60 shots, hitting on 5s. That was nice. Done that a number of times and wrecked a bunch of people doing that. However, now it's 2 CP to do that, and you're still shooting with Hurricane Bolters. So you got to make it count. Pick your targets. It may be worthwhile doing that with 5 Melta shots, depending on what's charging. You got a Knight coming in on like 2 health left. Then, that may be worth overwatching to get that sneaky 2 2 health down with a melt missile. So you got to make that decision at the time. But don't forget about the 5-up Overwatch. Unfortunately, they're bikes, so they cannot Tanglefoot, which really sucks. And it's a real opportunity cost of choosing bikes over, say, Venatari, because they're infantry. Vexilla Homer. We'll go back and talk about Venatari in a second. Vexilla Homer. So obviously, I'm just going to write that down because I totally forgot about that. Bikes versus Venatari. Okay. So I'm keeping all these notes in case I do this again later. Okay. So Vexilla Homer, obviously, you're going to use if you deep strike them. Indomitable Guardians is great. It applies to bikes as well for the interrupt. Burst Missile Net. I don't think I've ever used this stratagem. This is specifically for the flak burst profile on the salvo launcher. Lets you re-roll wounds. So I guess if you're using that for some reason, then you really need this thing to die. Well, it might be good. Like you really need to kill that Flyrant or that AdMech flyer that's really annoying. Like sure, spend the CP. That might be worth it. It might just be better to spend that CP on a bunch of salvo missiles. That might be a more reliable way of killing it. But anyway. Okay, Spark of Divinity. So obviously this specifically says usable by bikers, so don't forget that. Avenge the Fallen. Use this many, many times on bikers. You'll lose that one biker on Overwatch charging in, and you use Avenge the Fallen to get those attacks back. So obviously it's nice on all our units, no different on bikes. Stooping Dive. Okay, the old favorite Stooping Dive. The only stratagem specific to the biker, and still the only stratagem specific to the biker, Stooping Dive. Man, I've wrecked so many people with good Stooping Dives over the years, mostly in the first 6 to 9 months after our book came out when people just weren't paying attention to Custodes bikers, and they definitely weren't paying attention to Stooping Dive. They would charge in something just to do something, and then boom, 5 bikers in their face. And not so much the fact that I would kill that unit usually, because 5 bikers killed a lot back then, but it would give me extra movement, the charge move, then the pile in, then the consolidation, and then it would be my turn. One time I played this is a Canhammer team tournament. They had hid some scouts or something behind a ruin thinking he was safe. This is in the old days when you could fly over ruins on the charge. And I stooping dived him. I rolled a 11, so it got me all the way to the center of the table, wiped that unit easily, 3-inch pile in, 3-inch consolidate, and then I got my 14-inch move the next turn. I was in his gun line on turn 2 from a stooping dive. And he did not expect that, and I won that game easily because I just bad touched all his tanks and it was game over. So that was still in my mind as the best stooping dive of all time. But generally, Stooping Dive is still something, if you're playing bikers, keep it in your mind. It's 3 CP, so this is definitely a Trajan target if you're thinking that you might end up using it. Otherwise, you're going to cry. And really, you want to do this only if you can reliably get the charge. So some people, it's easy to play around a Stooping Dive. It's also very easy to tempt you into attempting a long Stooping Dive because you feel like you can do it and that it's going to be useful. Now remember, you need to get at least 3 or 4 guys in, depending on what you're hitting, to really make it worthwhile. So if you got to do the math in your head. Don't be tricked into doing a Stooping Dive that's going to fail. That's the worst. Or you want to get like 1 guy in, and then it's just wasted 3 CP basically. It's not worth it. Almost never is it good to Stooping Dive a shield captain, by the way. But sometimes it is, but rarely. So these are the things. Don't get caught out and tempted to Stooping Dive on a bad charge. All right. There's also a lot of some unanswered ambiguity these days about Stooping Dive, fight first and fight last rules and eligibility and all this shit. But that aside, it's become a little bit of a gimmick that is easy to play around and maybe could land you in trouble. So yeah. So just watch out for that. in the old days when we played bike spam, we used to set our bikes up so we had gaps in between the front line of bikers so the back line of bikers could stooping dive. It was very intricate how you deployed your bike unit so that one unit doesn't block the other unit from stooping diving. Anyway, those were the days. Okay. So, arcane genetic alchemy are transhuman, basically. So, obviously, this is something that you end up using on the bikes for strength 8 and above, because you have Grim for strength 7, and obviously super nice, and it would be very nice if it went down to 1 CP. I don't know if it's going to, but it would be nice. So, Slayer of Nightmares, again, would be super helpful against T7 and above, but for 2 CP, it seems steep for a +1 wound when other armies get it for free. And it would be really nice if it gave us, like, reroll damage, because, of course, you're still doing shitty D3 damage. So, yeah, I don't know. Slayer's Nightmare seems a bit of a CP trap, to be honest. But if you really need to kill that knight with your bikes, then that might be worth it for you. Fortress of Willpower, don't forget about it. Bikes can use it as well. And, okay, so superior fire patterns. So if you happen to be running Hurricane bolter bikes, let's say a unit of 5, standard size, 60 shots in rapid fire range. Now you can pretend you're an aggressor and do 120 shots for a CP in rapid fire range. 120 shots. And that's kind of fun. It's going to take you a long term. Oh, it doesn't work. Only infantry. Okay, never mind. I was thinking about that, and that would be stupid. So, okay, ignore that. We're going to talk instead about Old Spice. Emperor's Old Spice, obviously good on everything that we have. And again, Blood Games Vets. I'm not sure if that's infantry only. I think you can use it on bikers. But so if you're putting out 60 shots, then auto wounding on 6s, I mean, that's okay. I mean, if you really need to auto wound on 6s with AP0 1 damage bolters, then go for it. But yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem that good. But it could get your wounds through if maybe you're trying to shoot T8. But then the knight's still making 1 damage, 0 AP save. So, I don't think it's super good. It's obviously much better on like Venatari because they have, AP and damage. Okay, Fraternity of Heroes, don't forget, heroically intervening bikes is cool, and this stratagem lets you do it. And sometimes, like say you're hanging out on the back of an objective and your enemy's just trying to sneak on to steal the objective from you, you can do a cheeky little heroic, clear those guys, get a bit of extra movement for CP there. Very nice. Or Trajan's Warlord trait. If it's a bit longer, then you might decide to stooping dive, but that's 3 CPs. You got to really think what's the trade-off there. But for a CP, just the heroic geared bikes, and that's something that people always forget about. Most people don't even know we can do that. So it's a nice gotcha moment. Okay. So, lists and play strategy. Oh yeah, we're going to talk about Venatari. So it's hard again to compare bikes to Venatari because of points difference. I mean, Venatari are like 55 points and bikers are 85 points. There's a 30-point difference there. And now the Venatari have 2 up save. There's really not too much difference. So extra toughness, 2 extra inches of movement, and their melee is better unless you're using lances, which probably wouldn't be. So, their melee is stronger, but their shooting is different. You can't really compare the pistols to anything that the bikers have. And then, of course, infantry, so Tanglefoot, moving through terrain, cover, all those benefits of infantry and fly, and the bikes have bike and fly. So, I mean, this is a bad spot for the bikes when you're trying to compare them to bikers, unless you really need the salvo. That's really the saving grace for bikers. If they didn't have the salvo, nobody would be playing bikers ever. So, it's tough to compare bikers to Venatari. And, of course, fast attack slots, so they're competing for the same slot. Now, we'll see. With -1 damage, if Death Guard ends up everywhere, then we might see a significant drop in Venatari numbers because Venatari are not doing much against Death Guard. But they're still a fast unit that's a lot cheaper than the bikers if that's all you need from a unit to be fast and fly and everything. And infantry to do actions and stuff. but salvo against Death Guard probably better for shooting those things, although you have less shots. But yeah, the -1 damage really screws up 2 damage things. So we'll see. Okay, lists. So question number 1. Do I run bikes? Say over Venatari and Palace tanks. Well, we kind of talked about that throughout. The main argument against bikes really is still the cost. And the main argument for them, I still think, is probably just salvo, to be honest. You could compare them to Terminators. Should you run them instead of a unit of Aquilon Terminators? Well, I don't think you can compare those two units. If you need Terminators, you need Terminators. If you need bikes, you need bikes. I know they're the same cost, but that doesn't mean they're interchangeable. But they still seem very pricey for the number of wounds. Increasing to 5 or 6 wounds would be nice. But what do they add to your army? So they add mobility and speed, for sure. There's no doubt about that. You pay for it, but there's no doubt about that. If you need to shoot 20 inches with some OPSEC guys on turn 5 to get you those 5 primary points now at the end of the game, even one of these guys will do it for you. So that's definitely something to consider. Secondly, as I said, OBSEC objective grabbing. And with big enough bases these days, a unit of these guys can grab 2 objectives easily in many missions. And so that is another thing that they bring to the table. Engage on all fronts, line breaker, secondaries that are made for fast mobile units that can survive. And so bikers fill that role. Horde shooting. So if you do play in a meta with lots of Horde, specifically T3 Horde, but even T4 Horde, then bikers have that. They have the most shots out of any units in our book. So bikers have that. Distraction Carnifex. So a biker unit is a bit of a distraction for your opponent. Bikers have a reputation from before when we used to run 18 of them, and they were pretty good. They were hard to kill, and they hit hard, and they shot a lot. And so they have a rep, and they still have that rep. And now a lot of newer players of the game have never come across bikers before, and so when they see bikers, they're like, oh, what the hell is that? And then these things are moving 14 inches, and you're like, it shoots all these melter shots, and it has these number of attacks. So people get psyched out by that. Bikers have a rep, and they draw a lot of attention. Now, that's good and bad. Obviously, that's bad because they tend to die, but it's also good. You can use that to your advantage, especially if you play on a nice table where you can hide them so they don't get focused down right away. You can use that to draw attention, especially if you just put a minimum investment of 3 guys. They can be a real distraction Carnifex. If you have a big unit of 5 guys, that's a real distraction Carnifex because that actually will kill some stuff. And so that's a thing. The whole psychological factor, the reputation, projection of force, threat range, that's a thing. Both to experienced players because of what they used to be like, and to newer players because they don't really know what they used to be like and what they become. They also get that distraction. So I think you have to keep that in mind, the distraction Carnifex psychology of bikers. Okay. So, do dick bikes have a role in today's army? Probably not. Not right now. The only useful weapon really is the Adrathic. And maybe the last Pulsar. I mean, it's a useful weapon, but it's just too expensive. So that automatically makes it less useful. It's no good having a weapon if you have to pay through your nose to have it. And so the cost comparison to normal bikers is hard to justify, especially when we have a lot of Adrathic in the rest of the army. Now, granted, it's not strength 6, but, even your Achilles Dread has 4 Adrathic shots. Your Sags are all putting out Adrathic shots. You've got Terminators who can have Adrathic shots. So it just seems like it's not a shooting profile we need to pay a lot of bucks for on a bike profile. And so I just think, and the last Pulsar, as I said, has priced itself out of viability. So really, there's not much reason to take dick bikes right now. And the final thing about being priced out is that, you're paying 110 points for basically the same model as a Virtus Praetor that's 85 points. You're just paying for weapons. And so when that bike dies, you're going to cry a little inside. You'll die a little inside like this. And so it feels really bad. That game when I was running 5 dick bikes and Francois dropped his Inceptors and toasted 4 of them in one round. Now, granted, all the Inceptors died from plasma injury, but he lost, 200 points. I lost like 500 points. I was just like, that was like the end for dick bikes. And that was when they cost the same as the normal bikes. So it just a feel bad, and they died just the same as normal bikers. And yeah. So I think, we'll come to that now. So what unit size? So as I said before, I think the most common you see right now is 5. So 5 is the standard bike size. You don't run into the issues with having 6, coherency, blast. It's not a big deal, but still a deal. And, things like that. And in the future, when we have more stratagems that depend on unit size, probably, that seems to be a trend in all the different books, then you'll want to stick to 5 instead of 6. 5 is enough shots, 5 Melta shots. 4 starts seeming like it's too little. In my experience, 3 Melta starts to not do very much. And so, 5 is probably a nice number for a hammer bike unit. I think right now, there's a real role if you wanted to run a 3-man unit. That 3-man unit is a presence. Again, there's the psychology of it. 3 Melta shots is not bad, along with the other things in your army. And they still have enough combat potential to take out small units. They're OBSEC. They can scout, engage on all fronts, line breaker. And if you play properly with them and leave 1 or 2 guys left at the end of the game, those 1 or 2 guys are going to get you a lot of points and be very hard to deal with mid to late game. So I think a small 3-man unit definitely has play and should be considered if you really want to play bikes, but you don't want to spend the big bucks on a big hammer unit, or you don't need bikes to be your big hammer. So I think that's useful. In the same way that I thought in my Venatari Tactica that a small, I already did a Venatari Tactica, yeah, that a small unit of 3 or 4 Venatari could be very useful too, for similar reasons, and even more useful because of infantry and actions and free deep strike. But bikes don't have all those things. But a 3-man bike unit could serve some purpose. You'd probably just take a 3-man Venatari unit, but it could be a thing. I did a Venatari deep dive already. Yeah, pretty sure. Okay, because I remember talking about that. Okay. We can all remember, if you've played in the old days when you played bikes, you can always remember that last biker who survives getting hit. So the bikers smash into something, they do something, then they get counterattacked. Almost all of them die. You got 1 biker left with like 2 wounds or 3 wounds or 1 wound. And that biker does a whole bunch of stuff before dying, or sometimes they never die. He survives to the end. Mid to late game, turn 3, turn 4, that single surviving lone survivor biker can do a lot of things. Harass units, kill characters, get on backfield objectives, get you line breaker, just be really, really annoying and obnoxious. So I like that. So that brings us to play strategies. Okay. So I'm not going to go over all the different ways and strategies of playing bikes. There is a lot. Actually, if you go back and watch my old 8th edition reps when I was playing that list with the bikers, the Aquilon, and the gun line at the back, you don't have to pay attention to the details, but do pay attention to how I use the bikes and how that changed over the course of many games. And so I'll give you my golden tips for playing with bikers, okay? Number 1. Do not be over-aggressive. The overwhelming temptation, because they're fast and slightly hitty, is turn 1, streak them up the table and get on that middle objective because you think they'll survive, or get into that unit of incursors or those AdMech doggy dudes or scouts or whatever it is. Do not make that mistake. They are not as tough as you think. Definitely not now in the meta than they used to be, but even back then, it was almost always a mistake. And trading them for small scout units or other units or screen units early in the game at a loss usually is always bad. And it's so important to play them speculatively and at first defensively. If you have appropriate terrain, you can hide 4 or 5 normal Virtus Praetor bikes easily with obscuring and everything. Easy. You don't have to worry about those stupid spears anymore with the obscuring rule. So you should do that and bide your time. Don't fall into the trap, because turn 2, turn 3 comes along and they get into the mix, a full power bike unit. After you've whittled down the opponent's offensive capability a little bit, that becomes extremely hard to deal with. Let the Terminators take the brunt turns 1 and 2. They got defensive stratagems out the yin-yang. Let your bikes come in when you don't need to spend CP to defend them anymore and do their business. Get you mobility, get onto your opponent's objectives, harass, kill characters, touch tanks at the back. Like, they do a lot if they can survive into the mid to late game. Even, as I say, 1 or 2 guys surviving at the end of the game will do so many things for you, get you so many points, and your opponent will struggle to deal with them if they can at all. And so good later in the game. So don't throw them away early. It's almost always a mistake. And these days with the smaller table, increased terrain density means it's way easier for you to hide and bide your time. So they got the speed to go anywhere you want them to. Don't be over aggressive. That's golden tip number 1. Golden tip number 2 is kind of the same. Don't hide when you need to survive for the end of the game. Don't come to the overwhelming reasoning, which is, there's only 1 guy left, I'll just suicide him into there. Don't do that, okay? It almost always happens. Your bike hits something, they get counterattacked, and you lose a bunch of them, and you got 1 or 2 guys left, and what do? Stay in combat? No. Pull them out behind a building, hide them till your opponent forgets about them for a turn, okay? And then bring them back in turn 4, turn 5, and now they're in a perfect position to really do stuff for you. So survive now to fight later with the bikes, for sure. Never throw away that last guy or that last 2 guys just to do something small. Let somebody else do that. Save the bikes for later. Okay, and the final golden tip number 3, don't outrun your auras. So many times I've made this mistake in the past. Learn from my mistakes. Don't outrun your auras. They need auras. They need reroll hit auras, super nice, okay? Especially if you're only shooting 5 shots. You roll a couple of 1s and you're just crying. Don't outrun your auras. At some point, you're going to leave auras. That's fine, especially these days when we're only playing 1 or 2 HQs. You will leave your auras at some point, but make sure that's later in the game. Don't shoot off from all your auras turn 1 like I used to do all the time. Reroll 1s is super key when you're wounding everything on 3s. And in combat, very, very much more reliable when you're rerolling your 1s. And so don't outrun your auras. The other aura you will very commonly outrun, of course, is the Vexilla aura. If you're playing a Vexilla with -1 to hit, that really makes them more durable. Don't outrun it. Don't outrun it. Outrun your Vexilla, you will regret it. This is what's going to happen. You're going to charge. You're going to be on the charge. You're going to still, at the end of your charge, still be in Vexilla range. You'll be like, I'm sweet. And then you'll be in the thick of it, remembering the fight. You're going to pile in all your bikers and leave your aura. Then you're going to kill the unit you're fighting, or they will fall back, and now your bike unit does not have -1 to hit. That's always happens. Don't pile in and consolidate out of your aura. Okay, with the big oval bases and coherency, it's very easy to stay in the aura. So don't forget about that. That goes for all your units, but particularly for bikers, because they don't have ignore AP1 and AP2 and all this sort of stuff. If that -1 to hit can be very key for them surviving, don't leave your auras, especially when you have the dude right there. Not to mention you might be leaving your character open. So don't outrun your auras until you have to later in the game. Okay, those are my 3 golden tips for playing bikes from lots and lots of hard-earned experience and making mistakes. Okay, that is Bikes Deep Dive. Let's go to questions. You got questions on the chat. Running a little bit late, so we're going to wrap this up very soon. Go to the Discord for questions. Okay. Adrathic last ball sellers for Agamatic bikes. We talked about that. Bikes versus Venatari versus Palace. We talked about that. Dreadhost bike list. No. Is taking a Vex better when you have bikes? I don't think taking a Vex is better when you have bikes. I think Vex -1 to hit obviously helps bikes, but I don't think it's better because you have bikes. How many bikes should a list contain? I think the standard is 5. We already talked about that. How bad are dick bikes? We already talked about that. How good is reroll wounds? We talked about that. How useful is obstacle for instance fly? Talked about that. How many breakpoints for grim responsibility? Talked about that. How are you setting up stooping dive? I don't really do that anymore, but we can certainly do a tabletop strategy session on stooping dive. I think it's very hard to set up these days because most people are aware of it and easy to play around. When should you trade your unit of bikes? Try not to trade. How hard is it to win a game if you lose your unit of bikes early? Well, it's hard. You've lost a quarter of your army. How risky and a lot of mobility. How risky is it to charge bikes into something you won't kill on the charge? Well, as I said at the beginning, you want to try and avoid that. When should you fall back with bikes? We already talked about that. How much overlap do Venatari have with bikes? Some overlap. Talked about that. How often are you just short on range with bikes? Not often. What do you screen bikes with? Actually, I used to often use the bikes as screen. They're pretty good at that with the big bases. Okay, that was a lot of questions from Protoculture. How to deploy and play bikes early turns. Well, we're going to cover deployments on a tabletop strategy session, so maybe we'll cover it then. Vexilla mandatory. I don't think it's mandatory, especially if you have enough terrain and forests. Do you need a bike cap if you're taking bikes? We already talked about bike captains in another episode. Bikes versus Palace versus Venatari. Answered that. These are not questions, guys. Is there a good ratio of bolters versus salvos on a unit? Okay, well, we didn't talk about mixed units. I generally don't like mixed weaponry, especially when you only have 5 guys and it's just not enough shots. I guess. So like I already said, 5 salvo is good. 4 is already getting not good. And 3 is definitely probably not good for a hammer unit. And so if you want to run 4 salvo and 1 hurricane bolter, I mean, just if you have a bike captain, put the hurricane on the bike captain. I found that very useful to put hurricane on the bike captain because he's always sneaking around the back, taking out squads of guardsmen and stuff. And this 1 salvo was really useless, but hurricane bolter was really good on the bike captain. But on a big unit, I think I would just stick all the same weapons. I wouldn't mix hurricanes with salvo. You're shooting at different things. You're losing volume. Are Misericordia on bikes worth it? I don't think Misericordia is really worth it on anything, but often you have those points at the end of the game. And I 99% of the time forget that Trajan has one, for example. And even though that's killed people for me that otherwise wouldn't have died in some games. And when I do have them, I think they're almost kind of mandatory, at least a few on a unit of Sagittarium. And if I have points for Misericordia at the end of list building, I'll put them on Venatari because I like having 4 attacks, basically. But yeah, so sure, if you got points and nothing else to do with it, then put some Misericordia on them. But I used to do it and I always forget. Okay. And that is all the Discord questions. I don't see any questions on chat. And okay, so thanks for watching, guys. Thank you for your support, subscribing, following, and patrons. Big shout out to the patrons. Join the Discord. Thank you very much for watching. So I guess I'm gonna look through my deep dives, but I think we're basically done. Let's see. Let's have a quick look here. Deep dives. So bikes, dreads, guardians, sags, captains, tanks, Trajan, Vexilla, wardens, terminators. So what have we missed? I think okay, so we haven't done Venatari. I swear I did Venatari. Sagittarium. Okay, maybe I didn't do Venatari. Okay, so then we got Venatari to do, and we got the flyers to do, which won't take long. And then I think we're done. So we got 2 more deep dives, and then we'll be done with deep dives. All right, cool. All right, so join us tomorrow night on the podcast. I'll be joined by Francois and Nick again, as usual. We will be talking about some Death Guard stuff, and we will be talking about centerpiece 40K, centerpiece models, big models, Primarch, stuff like that. Do we like them? Do we not like them? What did he do to the game? How can we make them more kind of balanced? Topical now with Morty coming on the horizon, so we'll be talking about that tomorrow night. So join us tomorrow night, guys, and stay safe. Have a good night.